So I've been thinking about creating a channel here for a while. Um, Despite the fact that I make my living talking on cam, um, it totally makes me weirded out. I think there's an idea that if you um, vlog, that you're comfortable with it necessarily, and that you could even be like an egomaniac narcissist, and I'm just a little anxious Russian girl. Um, anyway, uh, I just feel like I'm gonna. So much bullshit is going on in the world, just in my own life lately, and I feel like if I don't get it out some way, I'm gonna hit someone with a frying pan, or set myself on fire. I just feel like I'm losing my mind sometimes. And there's so many voices around us that say these awful things routinely. And it's just like this inundation of fucked up things, and there aren't enough voices from weird positions speaking back to them. And it's so disheartening. It feels like you're screaming into the wind. And there's really only very few people that I know who, I feel like I always have atypical opinions, and it's really frustrating. Because I only want the best for myself and for others, and seeing stuff like folks being so nasty on social media about stuff that's so stupid, it's like really hard to deal with, and no one ever slows down, or not no one, but it's so rare to find someone else who's like, hold up, slow down, like, could we take, it's not my concept, but the average of people versus freaking out about the dumbest stuff. Like, who cares if two friends who have known each other for years disagree about guns? Like, who the fuck cares? 99% of the people in this world want the same shit: to have their families be safe, to have a job that they can work, that they don't, that doesn't make them hate themselves, that they can support themselves on, access to basic medical care, some sort of social structure where you could create a family, and if that's your thing. And people get so, like, the vitriol over just nonsense. I just don't get it. And then that coupled with this seeming entitlement to a life and to rights that then you then try to limit for others, it's just crazy. And God forbid you call someone out and say, you can't, if just because you are for something or against something doesn't mean that, like, you have the right to make that decision for yourself, and that necessarily depends on the idea that we all have equal value. And if you think that your opinion counts, then you necessarily support that everyone else's opinion counts. And people don't feel that way, and that's fucking nuts. And no one calls them out on it. Like, it's just very difficult to be around, and this whole medium is so weird, because it for sure sets it up like you're a character, or you're trying to get attention if you speak on something, but, there are people who really are good people who want change and positive improvement, and there's so many wonderful mediums to do it through. And feeling disempowered and like it's not even worth it, because you can't get all upset about all these issues and then also live a livable life, and be able to make a living and keep a roof over your head and afford the medical care that you need to survive. And you can't do that and then also tackle all of the world's problems. And if you're from like a marginalized community, you're expected to do all the work, and it's like, I can't fucking do all this. Like, the sort of in-group creates these problems, and then you're pressured and coerced to feel like it's your thing to fix. And in a sense it is, you have to speak up on them, but the retaliation that you get just for trying to have your voice heard on something that's should be so obvious, it's just tough to deal with. So I mean, I know so few people who seem to have the same sort of opinions, and that's really unfortunate that the majority, thinks that they can dictate to other people what they can and cannot do with their bodies, and they want the right for themselves, but they also somehow don't defend that for everyone else, and to me it just makes no logical sense, because it's illogical. It's based on, emotion, and people think that only their ego matters and only they matter, and they don't see it that way, which doesn't make any sense to me. I'm for sure too far on the spectrum, the end of the spectrum of being overly analytical and anxious, and that's for sure the biggest challenge that I deal with. I have an orthopedic disability. I was born in Russia, was adopted. I'm in severe pain 24/7. People look at me and they characterize me as incompetent and stupid and non-autonomous and a dependent, and I'm an adult. I've been an adult for a while, and it's really tough to it's tough to hear all the time, don't complain, other people have it worse, and I agree with that, absolutely. But that's not typically, but I've noticed there's a correlation between that and folks who don't really have anything going on, who objectively have easier lives. We're so lucky to be here. I'm a white, well-educated person who grew up in the West. I have my own challenges. I've been through my own, fucked up situations, but I feel really lucky most of the time. I feel really happy most of the time. And then there's people, who will kill you to steal $10 out your pocket, who have more than enough to survive. And those are typically the people that I see, or maybe that's not a fair characterization to match up with the whole, don't complain thing. But it's just something that I've experienced a lot lately of, I was dating someone for a while who constantly complained about how tough their life was. It was a straight white dude who worked in in an area that they loved, and they got to do their hobby, multiple times a week, and I was really supportive of their projects, and they weren't supportive of mine, and in fact, they actually made things much more difficult. And I just wish that, on the one hand, you need to sort of be delusionally optimistic in this world to survive. If you have a non-normative or subjugated, race or, gender or sexuality or disability or immigration status or whatever, or health issues. I mean, there's so many different ways that you can get fucked over. But also wanting to balance that with, you can do something. You don't have to devote 100% of your effort to feeling shitty that this stuff exists. You can still strike that balance, and I don't know if I would call it an obligation, but the worse that stuff gets and the scarier that stuff gets, the more inclined I'm to not be polite. not be polite, but not be fucking passive and a pussy about all this stuff. Because I feel like I'm so constantly worried about, if I say I have an orthopedic disability, which makes it so that my joints are malformed, and I have really low muscle tone and body fat. So it pretty much just means, for me anyway, most people have it far worse who have this disability, arthrogryposis. And I'm fully aware of that, but realistically what that means to me is, it's a small percent of it. I would say 10% of it is stuff that you actually deal with having a disability. So being in excruciating pain 24/7. My hips are dislocated, so that means that the top of my joint is just free-floating in soft tissue. It's in a pocket that's been formed, through infancy and childhood, which is how it happens for normal children. But so I'm in pain 24/7 for that. It takes me much more effort to do something that someone wouldn't think about who doesn't have a disability, which, because the joints are not in their place, means that you deal with a ton of inflammation on top of pain. So not only does it take you more effort, but it causes a ton of pain, which is exhausting. So I would say, when I did stress tests, and I know I have a family member who, cites this, that the doctor was like, yeah, it takes her about like 4 to 5 times as much energy just to do something that you wouldn't think about. Like for me to walk, I have to think about it, which I don't think people who don't have a disability would never even think of such a concept. It's the same thing, like, you know, dudes who have never been afraid to walk home at night literally don't get the stress that women go through because they've never been in that situation. But they try to be really judgmental and try to set the standards for people in that situation, which is crazy to me. Anyway, so I've just been thinking a lot about, I've put up with so much fucked up stuff. The largest part of it, I would say 90% of having a disability in this country is other people. You know, normal people create this problem, create these distinctions, and then offer or make you fight for really, really shitty solutions. Like I just go my day-to-day life. I'm polite. I love people. I thrive off of being around other people. And I get treated like I'm a moron constantly. Like I'm stupid and that I can't do things for myself when I've never, it's sort of a classic, disability, like, let me do it myself kind of thing. And it's the smallest part of how I see myself. I don't deny that I have it. I don't think it's a bad thing. But I wish that other people would focus on other shit. Like, if anything, my anxiety, which is sort of slightly related, plays a far larger role. And people don't give a shit. They try to act like they, having a disability or something is, or being dicked over in some sort of way is something that they care about, and they don't. No one cares about disability unless they know someone personally close to them who has one. When they get to see the shit that we have to go through. And I have most of my friends are from some sort of marginalized community. I think there's just a natural sort of connection there. Because when you hear about people and what they have to go through, getting, if you're trans and getting harassed daily, getting assaulted, getting murdered, and I feel like disability is one of the last, frontiers, if you will, like, big jumps were made for sexuality. And so I'm actually surprised that we've made as much progress for trans rights. And, in this time when we're facing those getting rolled back and people having even shittier ideas because of this moron in office, this violent moron in office, it's really scary. More people need to speak up, and it's so fucked up because we already worked so hard for so little, many of us, through complicated scenarios, and it's also a personal, I need to vent. It's not even venting, it's not because you're angry, it's just you have so much shit thrown at you, and you need to let a little of it, a little bit of the exhaustion and the frustration out at the seams, or else you're going to lose your mind, or you're going to spend a lot of your time either downright miserable and depressed, or just super acutely anxious, which is how it's manifested for me. And no one should feel like that. That's fucked up. Like, no one deserves to feel that way. It's not a personal failing. Like, I struggle with that characterization when people just focus solely on how do you manage it for yourself. Like, you manage it for yourself by, for me it's been really helpful to do research on human dynamics and communication, just because that's not a skill that naturally comes to me. I feel like no matter what I say or I do, it gets, I've been dicked over so many times by, like, in weird situations, like the last housing situation I was living in. I lived with a bunch of people who, one, pulled a gun on me. I'm 4'11", I'm 90 pounds, I have a disability. Like, there's a big dude who pulled a gun on me. I just, just insane nonsense. I was living with 5-6 people, is paying for everything. I've never been on disability, I've never been on unemployment. And there's just so many misunderstandings about a lot of things that, if I could be of any benefit to some person who has some role in power, even if they don't, even if they're just a normal person and they don't know, because I feel like my experience is often when I share, like, how many times I've, gotten poked or followed home to people who don't get shitty treatment based on that sort of character vector, they generally are shocked and horrified. So, like, you read so much stuff online about all this awful, like, just awful, violent stuff, and then, you know, when you talk to people in real life about it, usually they're horrified and they're shocked. So when I moved away from New York a couple years ago to be in a serious relationship with someone, and I experienced so much anguish there because literally daily I would get touched by a stranger. I'd get grabbed and pulled, with the idea was that I was being offered a seat by a stranger. But it was never an offer. It's generally, you know, I had earbuds in, I have facial piercings to show that I'm an adult, you know, to please, you know, I'm usually reading on the subway, I'm usually doing homework and trying to get work done. And, you know, and people would think that they're actually doing you a favor, and they're not. They're invading your space, they're interrupting your time, and you're, you know, minding your own business, you're zoned into a book, trying to get work done. And they would often do it in these really violent ways, like they would grab me, and there's like no interpretation where that's acceptable. If someone has earbuds in, they're reading a book, they're minding their own business, they're standing, you know, balanced against the, you know, the side of the car, or just, you know, against, you know, just standing in the middle of the train. Just don't touch people that you don't know. It's totally inappropriate. And the fact that that behavior is so normalized to the point where, I mean, I literally would deal with it multiple times a day. And then I thought that was obvious. Like, I just sort of assumed, you know, my friends knew, and my professors knew, and my family knew, and they didn't know. And when I would tell, you know, professors like, yeah, some dude poked me in the genitals, you know, because with a rolled up magazine to try to get my attention, to ask if I wanted to sit down, I mean, or getting screamed in my face that I'm a bitch if I say, no, you know, I'm all right, or if I finally get annoyed if someone really strongly coerces me to sit down when I don't need to sit down. Like, I'm a big girl. I'm not a big girl, I'm a little girl, but I'm an adult. Like, if I need to sit down, I'm going to open my mouth and ask someone to get up. Like, that should be the normal. And unfortunately, there's a lot of things that have become, like I said, normalized. It's wrong. It shouldn't happen. And I feel like there aren't enough people who are saying, like, we as a collective, or just me individually, do not want you to do this. Like, a disabled person does not want you to call them out and go, quote unquote, above and beyond to try to help them if they're, especially giving clues that anybody else would read as, you know, I'm cool, I'm reading a book, I'm minding out my business. Which is also not to say that there aren't fucked up things that need to be changed, like the accessibility issue on New York City subways is horrible. Etiquette is horrible. Routinely seeing people get harassed, myself getting harassed, you know, for various different stupid reasons. And people get blamed for it. Like, there's so much victim blaming. Like, well, you know, did you make eye contact with that person? It's like, why the fuck would me making eye contact with someone, how is that inviting you screaming in my face or following me home? Like, I got followed home so many times by weirdos. And typically it was like out of a sexual predatory thing, which is really terrifying, you know, especially where I lived and I was by myself. And I think that's not okay. Like, and people have this oblivion to the fact that that's a reality for so many people. And there's so many more things that are messed up that I don't experience, that I, you know, empathize with, that are just wrong. If you have a soul, if you're not a sociopath, like, you're gonna feel annoyed, you know. And I feel like it's sort of the same idea. Like, the most racist people tend to be the people who don't know anyone who's not white. And not only do they have the best opinions, but they're the most assured of themselves in their shitty opinions. And there just need to be more voices to speak back to that. So if I can do that here, even if not effectively, even if it's not curated, even if it's just, you know, 4:56 in the morning, like, we don't have to be perfect, we just have to get the shit on the paper, and we just have to speak up a little bit. And not just for disability, that's just such a small example, but stuff that's so simple, like, Sorry, my computer died. But ranting too much. But stuff that's really simple. Like if I tell a big straight white dude friend, like, yeah, I got touched multiple times a day on the subway. I grabbed multiple times a day on the subway. It didn't matter how I responded, if I was polite, if I was passive, if I was assertive, if I was aggressive, I always got the same response. So, and with anxiety, it carries over. I have some wonderful, awesome, strong friends who really give me that inner compass when I don't have it. I think getting fucked over so many times in a row and getting, all the, I don't want to just say like media portrayals, but just the way that, people with disabilities and people with, struggles get portrayed is so backwards. Like, it's just crazy. So like a good example is everyone thinks that like disabled people don't want to work and that maybe they're lazy, or that to incorporate them into the normal workforce is too much labor or too much effort or something, which is bullshit. And people don't even think about it. Unless you know someone with a disability, you don't think about it. And you just make yourself feel good by thinking, oh, there's social services that take care of them. And when and they don't know that having a disability costs so much more. You get paid so much less. The disparity between income and wealth is crazy huge. I mean, it's the only thing comparable is to being trans and not passing. Like that's the only thing that comes close to it. It cuts across all other categories. It's it's episodic. It can come and go. It's it can be short term, long term. It can be acute. It can be mental. It can be physical. And I really do feel like there's so much more work that needs to be done. And there's some good people that I see, but any other good voice is only an asset. But anyway, not to get off track, but so when I looked into like SSI recently, people just have this assumption that disabled people don't want to work, and that assistance totally covers them. And at least in my state, it was $700 a month, and if you make $700 a month or more, it voids it, and you have to pay it back. And who the hell can live on $700 a month? Much less on with a disability. Like, and that's not even factoring how much harder it is to get employed. And saying that is not a pity party. It's not saying like, I'm using it as an excuse or something. That's not true. It's just bullshit. It's just not true. You have to do both simultaneously. Be a sort of delusionally positive and ignore reality and all the facts that like 18% of people with a serious disability are employed, and that's not because they can't work. That's not because they don't want to work. That's because there's so much discrimination in employment, and that goes hand in hand with representations. Like, I don't know the only person I can think of with like a serious disability is Stephen Hawking. And the reason why he's so incredible, not only for his, for after he passed away, the reason why he was so incredible was not just for his intellect, but also because he had a disability. And people use that as like the one shining example of it, like, see, you can make it too. Or, blindness and, but in comparison to how many people actually are, who live with a disability, it's crazy. It's like nowhere. It's just abominable, and we can do better. And then to get into even more complicated conversations of being employed, and working for pay, it's not just about pay. It's also about your identity and about confidence, and that's a thing that I've also struggled a lot with. I think when you get treated like you're an idiot daily, and you get coddled, and people who are overbearing and overprotective, not to help you, but to actually make themselves feel good, not in like a nefarious way. It's not a bad thing to feel that way, but the intervention that people do in the attempt to be helpful is often inappropriate and harmful. And if you respond to it, people just say that you're being a bitch, and it's just like, no, actually your behavior is inappropriate. And readjusting those standards to see things accurately and clearly I think is really valuable. So it's just tricky. And that's, and there's also so many things, like people make jokes about having a disability, and it's just so weird how people support the most fucked up stuff and then also are super self-righteous about, like, you can't joke about disability, and it's like, we didn't say that. Like, we don't agree with that. We certainly, there's a difference between being politically correct, which is, in my mind, to be aware of the realities that people are going through, and to try to be not even sensitive, just aware of them, versus what it's been turned into, which is political correctness for it's just being an asshole. It's just like being condescending and speaking for other people and saying, like, you can't joke about disability. Well, who said so? Like, disabled people didn't say that. Like, we want improved rights and improved life chances and quality of life, but we certainly didn't say that. And it just adds to the problem that that this part of the culture created and making us deal with it. It's so backwards. So I already feel a little bit better, but I really have been feeling like I've been losing my mind. And if I can sort of try to sit down and curate something, I often sort of think, like, what could I possibly have to offer? But, the fact that there are places where, folks with disabilities are grouped together and are paid, literally 80 cents an hour to do some menial task, instead of actually doing, something positive, which is integrating folks with disabilities. And I think that's something that I'm very fortunate and that my family was very supportive of. They made sure that they fought for me to be in a normal school, because intellectually it was fine. They just were nervous about, I don't even need any, special adaptations. I mean, it's crazy. Like, I dealt with that, what did I need? I used PT and OT when I was a kid. I mean, like, I didn't need them to rearrange the school or the buildings or even use a wheelchair. Like, I mean, really the most basic, inobtrusive sort of disability. And this still was a big fight for them. It's just horrible. It's just fucked up. Like, the focus should be on integration and, God forbid, having to deal with people who are different from you, so that instead of making their lives so much shittier just so you can feel good about yourself, so you don't have to potentially deal with 2 seconds of, uncertainty or discomfort being around someone who's different from you. Like, that's a good thing. Not just for disabled people, but for normal people, because you can become disabled in 2 seconds. You can get hit by a car. And then all these things, and, these people who you were, mean to and judgmental of when you had never met one, that's now you. So, yeah. It feels so weird talking at 5 o'clock in the morning, but I just feel like I'm going to lose my mind. And I have goals. I have things that I want to do. I'm starting to get into aviation, and I'm pushing to do that, and thankfully I'm in a wonderful school where people are really supportive and wonderful and great teachers and so supportive, and most of them are, the typical sort of image of a pilot. And you don't really see many females, across sort of different types of flight. It's between like 3 and 12% for female representation. And then if you want to add in if you're a person of color, or if you're gay, or if you're trans, or have a disability, it's like a handful of people that we're talking about in the country. And that doesn't discourage me. If anything, the positive reinforcement from instructors and also knowing those stats, it really doesn't make me feel more anxious. It makes me feel like I typically would. It makes me want to push harder and speak up for things. So anyway, this is really just to get it off my chest. Yeah, I feel so much better. I'm going to do more research, but I just want to offer an atypical voice. Maybe it'll strike some resonance with some people. I don't have the most confidence when I'm saying things that are atypical, and I find that because I'm passive most of the time, because that's sort of how I've been, not just as a woman, but even calling myself a woman feels weird. But But then having a disability and being tiny and having anxiety, like all of these things really compound on that. And like, I don't want to do that anymore. Yeah, it's just, why the fuck should I stay silent so that it makes it easier for someone else to fuck me over? Like, I can't do that anymore. Like, I'm not going to do that anymore. I don't want this, those experiences that I've had, the bad ones, to continue on for other people. And if I can just shape things in other ways, because I feel like when you have a subjugated part of yourself, you really do have a dual vision. You can see it from the sort of normative side and also the subjugated side, and that's only a benefit. That's only a benefit. Most people are not, sociopathic assholes. Most people are just clueless, and they don't know what they're doing, and they don't know the anguish that they cause to people when they say horrible things. They've just never thought about it because they're not in that position. So if I can offer a voice in that regard, that would make me feel good. Even if YouTube can be a weird place, but I mean, I do this for a living outside of here, so. But yeah, so I always thought it was funny. I dig learning new skills. It makes me a very happy camper. But so I learned how to figure out how to tie like a baby. I hate when people ask stupid questions, like, and they're on their phone and they're asking you a stupid question. Like, you're attached to the internet. You're always attached to the cloud. Like, just look it up. It takes 2 seconds, and then you'll know something new that you didn't know before. Like, how incredible is that? Like, that's so amazing. Anyway, so I figured out how to tie. I don't know if you can see him. It's a rabbit. But my little anxious buddy. So that's what I do at 5 in the morning when I can't sleep and I'm working. But yeah. It's so weird to make a video not talking to anybody. But I hope if anyone sees this, I don't know. I'm excited to see if I can do some good and learn from other smart people and maybe do a tiny bit of good, even if it's to, like, 1 or 2 people, just like I try to do in my day-to-day life, just sort of disseminating a different view and just a different perspective. Anyway,